David had always been the type of person who liked his life simple and predictable. At 34, he worked as a computer programmer for a small tech company downtown. His apartment was clean, organized, and quiet, exactly the way he preferred it. Ever since his divorce 6 months ago, he had grown comfortable with the silence. No more arguments about leaving dishes in the sink or forgetting to take out the trash. Just him, his computer, and the gentle hum of the city outside his window. The divorce hadn't been messy, just sad. He and his ex-wife had simply grown apart, like two ships slowly drifting in different directions. She wanted adventure, travel, and excitement. He wanted stability, routine, and peace. Neither was wrong, but they weren't right for each other anymore. So they signed the papers, divided their belongings, and went their separate ways. These days, David's routine was as predictable as sunrise. Wake up at 7, coffee and toast, work until 6, dinner from the Chinese place down the street, some TV, and bed by 11. It wasn't exciting, but it was his, and that felt good enough. But lately, sleep had become his enemy every night. He would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with random thoughts about work, bills, and the strange emptiness that seemed to follow him everywhere. He tried everything: warm milk, meditation apps, even counting sheep like his grandmother used to tell him. Nothing worked most nights. He wouldn't fall asleep until 2 or 3 in the morning, only to wake up tired and groggy. The night it happened was no different from any other. November had brought an early cold snap to the city, and David had cranked up the heat in his small apartment. He was wearing his usual sleeping clothes, an old college t-shirt, and comfortable pants. The digital clock on his nightstand glowed, red in the darkness, 2:17 a.m. He had been tossing and turning for hours, frustrated and exhausted. Finally, mercifully, sleep began to pull him under. His eyelids grew heavy, his breathing slowed, and the endless chatter in his mind started to fade. For the first time in weeks, David felt truly peaceful. Then he felt warmth. Not the artificial warmth from his heater, but the unmistakable warmth of another human body. It was pressed against his back, gentle and real, in his half-asleep state. David's first thought was confusion. Had he been dreaming? Was this some kind of weird sleep paralysis thing he'd read about online? But as he became more aware, he realized this was no dream. He could feel breathing against his neck, slow and steady. He could smell something faint and floral, like lavender or jasmine. Most shocking of all, he could feel bare skin against his shirt. David's eyes snapped open. His heart started pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. Very slowly, afraid of what he might find, he turned around. There, lying in his bed as if she had always been there, was a woman he had never seen before in his life. She appeared to be sleeping deeply, her face peaceful and calm. She had dark, shoulder-length hair that fell across the pillow, and her skin had a warm, golden tone. She looked to be in her late 20s, maybe early 30s, and she was completely without clothes. David's mind went blank. This was impossible, absolutely impossible. His apartment was on the 4th floor. Every window was locked. The front door had 3 different locks, and he had checked them all before bed. Just like he did every night, the security system was armed. There was no way anyone could have gotten in, but she was there, real, breathing, and taking up half of his bed. He sat up slowly, trying not to wake her, his mind spinning with questions. Who was she? How did she get in? What was she doing in his bed? Was this some kind of elaborate prank? But who would do such a thing, and how? David grabbed his phone from the nightstand and turned on the flashlight, keeping it dim so he wouldn't startle her. In the soft light, he could see her more clearly. She had delicate features and what looked like a small birthmark on her shoulder, shaped like a crescent moon. She was breathing slowly and evenly, as if she was in the deepest sleep of her life. His hands shaking, David quietly got out of bed and walked around his apartment, checking every possible entry point. The front door was locked, deadbolt engaged. The windows were all locked from the inside. The fire escape window hadn't been open in months. He could tell, because there was dust on the latch. The security system panel showed green lights across the board. No doors or windows had been opened. No motion detectors had been triggered. It was as if she had simply appeared out of thin air. David stood in his living room, staring back toward his bedroom, trying to make sense of what was happening. Maybe he was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe the stress of the divorce and the loneliness had finally caught up with him. Maybe he was seeing things that weren't there. But when he crept back to his bedroom, she was still there, still breathing, still real. He considered his options. He could call the police. But what would he tell them? That a woman had somehow teleported into his bed. They would think he was crazy. He could try to wake her up. But what if she was dangerous? What if she had some kind of weapon? What if she started screaming and the neighbors called the police anyway? David decided to call 911. Whatever was happening, this was beyond anything he could handle alone. He spoke quietly to the dispatcher, explaining that he had found someone in his apartment and needed help. He didn't mention the impossible part about how she had gotten there while waiting for the paramedics. David kept watch from his bedroom doorway. The woman hadn't moved at all. She lay perfectly still, as if she was in some kind of deep trance. Her breathing was so steady it was almost hypnotic. The paramedics arrived within 10 minutes. Along with the police officers, David led them to his bedroom, his heart pounding with nervousness and embarrassment. What if they thought he was making it up? What if they thought he had done something wrong? But as they entered the bedroom, all four men stopped in their tracks. The bed was empty, completely empty. The sheets were still warm where she had been lying, and there was a slight indent in the pillow where her head had rested, but she was gone. David stared at the bed in shock. She was right there. He stammered, "I swear, she was right there. Just 5 minutes ago." The police officers exchanged glances. One of them, older man with kind eyes, put a hand on David's shoulder. "Sir, are you taking any medications? Have you been drinking tonight?" David shook his head frantically. "No, nothing like that. I'm telling you, there was a woman in my bed. She was real. I could touch her. I could hear her breathing." The paramedics checked David's vital signs and asked him questions about his mental state. The police searched his apartment thoroughly, looking for any signs of forced entry or evidence that someone had been there. They found nothing. After an hour of questions and searches, everyone left. David was alone again, sitting on his bed, staring at the spot where she had been. The sheets still smelled faintly of lavender. Had he imagined it all? Was his mind playing tricks on him? But it had felt so real. She had felt so real. David didn't sleep for the rest of the night. He sat in his living room chair, watching his bedroom door, wondering if he was losing his mind. As the sun came up, he began to convince himself that it had been a dream, a very vivid, very strange dream, but a dream nonetheless. But deep down, he knew it hadn't been a dream. Something impossible had happened in his apartment that night, something that would change his life forever. He just didn't know it yet. David couldn't focus on anything for the next 3 days. At work, he would stare at his computer screen, but instead of seeing code, he kept seeing her face. The peaceful expression, the way her hair fell across the pillow, the impossible reality of her presence in his bed. His coworkers noticed his distraction, but he couldn't exactly explain what was bothering him. "Hey, you okay?" asked his desk neighbor, Tom, during their lunch break. "You seem pretty out of it lately." David forced a smile. "Just haven't been sleeping well. You know how it is." But Tom didn't know how it was. Nobody could know how it was, because what David had experienced was impossible. At least, that's what he kept telling himself. The rational part of his mind had almost convinced him it was a dream. Almost. But every time he walked into his bedroom, he could swear he still smelled that faint floral scent. And when he looked at his bed, he could still see the exact spot where she had been lying. By the weekend, David couldn't take it anymore. He needed answers. Even if those answers proved he was losing his mind. He opened his laptop and started typing into the search bar, feeling foolish with every word, person appearing in bed teleportation. The results were mostly jokes and science fiction stories. But as he dug deeper, scrolling through pages of nonsense, he found something that made his heart skip a beat. A forum post from 2 years ago, titled "She Just Appeared in My Room. Need Help?" The post was from a man in Seattle who described almost the exact same experience. A woman had appeared in his bedroom, completely without warning, seeming to be in a deep sleep. She had vanished after about 20 minutes, leaving no trace behind. The man had called the police, but they found nothing. The responses to his posts were mostly people calling him crazy or a liar. David's hands were shaking as he kept searching. He found another story from a woman in Texas who claimed her ex-boyfriend had somehow appeared in her living room while she knew for certain he was in another state. Then another from a man in Canada who said his deceased grandmother had appeared in his kitchen, solid and real, before disappearing. Most of these stories were dismissed as hoaxes or hallucinations. But David found a few that seemed different. The people telling them sounded genuinely confused and frightened. They described the same details he remembered: the warmth, the realness, the complete impossibility of it all. He spent hours reading about astral projection, out-of-body experiences, and something called spontaneous human teleportation. Most of the websites looked like they were made by conspiracy theorists. But buried among the crazy theories were a few academic papers that discussed unexplained phenomena. One paper, written by a psychology professor, talked about cases where people claimed to have experienced consciousness displacement during extreme stress or trauma. The professor didn't claim these experiences were real teleportation, but he also didn't dismiss them entirely. He suggested that the human mind might be capable of things science didn't yet understand. David printed out everything he could find and made a folder. If it happened again, he wanted to be prepared. He set up a small camera in his bedroom, pointed at his bed. He also put a notebook and pen on his nightstand, just in case he needed to document anything quickly. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. David began to relax, convinced that whatever had occurred was a one-time event. Maybe it really had been a dream, or some kind of stress-induced hallucination. He almost started to feel normal again. Then, on a Thursday night, it happened again. David woke up the same way as before, feeling warmth against his back. But this time, he didn't panic. He lay very still, his heart pounding, and slowly turned around. She was there again, the same woman, in the same position, breathing the same slow, peaceful breaths. But something was different this time. In the dim light from his alarm clock, David could see what looked like marks on her wrists, red lines that looked like they might be from rope or tape. Moving very carefully, David reached for his phone and activated the camera. His hands were shaking, but he managed to take several photos. The flash didn't seem to disturb her sleep at all. She remained perfectly still, as if nothing could wake her. David grabbed his notebook and started writing down everything he could observe: the time, to 4:43 a.m., her position, lying on her side, facing away from him, her breathing, slow and steady, about 12 breaths per minute, the marks on her wrists, red, like rope burns, but not bleeding. As he wrote, he noticed something else. She was whispering something in her sleep, very quietly, almost too soft to hear, but definitely words. David leaned closer, trying to make out what she was saying. "Help, please. Someone help." The words were barely audible, but they made David's blood run cold. This wasn't just some random supernatural event. This woman was in trouble. Real trouble. David wanted to wake her up, to ask her what was happening. But something held him back. What if waking her somehow made her disappear faster? What if this was his only chance to learn more about what was happening to her? He kept listening to her whispered words, writing down everything he could understand. Most of it was too quiet to make out, but he caught a few phrases. "Can't get out. He's coming back." And what sounded like a name, Elena. David watched the clock. 22 minutes after he had first noticed her, she began to fade. Not all at once, but gradually, like she was becoming transparent. Her whispers grew quieter and quieter until they stopped entirely. Within 60 seconds, she was gone. But this time, something was left behind. As David stared at the empty bed, he noticed something glinting in the sheets. He reached over and picked up a small silver ring. It was simple, with no decorations, but it was real and solid in his hand. David sat up in bed, holding the ring and staring at his photos. The images clearly showed the woman in his bed, the marks on her wrists and her peaceful but troubled expression. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't a hallucination. This was real. And this woman, Elena, was in serious danger. He looked at the ring again. It was slightly warm, as if it had been worn recently. There was no inscription, but inside the band, he could see tiny scratches that might have been made by fingernails. David didn't sleep for the rest of the night. He sat in his living room, looking at the photos on his phone and turning the ring over in his fingers. Elena, if that was really her name, was somehow reaching out to him. Across impossible distances, she was trapped somewhere, hurt and desperately, asking for help. But how could he help someone who might not even be physically there? How could he save someone who appeared and disappeared like a ghost? David realized that he was no longer dealing with just a strange experience. He was dealing with someone's life. Elena was counting on him, even if she didn't know it, and somehow, he had to find a way to reach her before it was too late. The next morning, David called in sick to work. He had more important things to do. He had to figure out how to save a woman who could teleport into his bed, but couldn't escape from wherever she was being held captive. As impossible as it seemed, David knew that Elena's life might depend on him solving this mystery, and he wasn't going to let her down. David spent the next week preparing for Elena's return. He had no idea if she would appear again, but something deep in his gut told him she would. The silver ring sat on his nightstand, a constant reminder that what he had experienced was real. During the day, he carried it in his pocket, rolling it between his fingers whenever doubt crept into his mind. He had called in sick to work for 3 days straight, spending his time researching everything he could about missing persons and unexplained disappearances. David printed out photos of women who had gone missing in the past year, wondering if Elena might be among them, but without knowing her last name or where she might be from. It felt like looking for a needle in a haystack. On Friday evening, David decided to walk around his neighborhood, hoping to spot someone who might recognize Elena from the photos on his phone. He felt ridiculous showing strangers pictures of a woman who had appeared in his bed, but he had to try something. At the coffee shop 3 blocks from his apartment, David showed the photos to the young man behind the counter. The barista squinted at the screen, then shook his head. Nope, never seen her before. David was about to leave when an older woman working the register looked over. Wait, let me see that, she said, reaching for his phone. She stared at the image for a long moment, then looked up at David with surprise. That's Elena. She used to work here. David's heart nearly stopped. She worked here. When, maybe 6 or 7 months ago. She was really sweet, always had a smile for everyone, but she just stopped showing up one day. We figured she found another job or moved away. The woman handed back his phone. Is she okay? You look worried. David tried to keep his voice steady. I'm just trying to get in touch with her. Do you remember her last name? The woman thought for a moment. Vasquez, I think. Elena Vasquez. She was studying at the community college while she worked here. Always had her textbooks with her during breaks. David thanked the woman and practically ran home. Finally, he had a real name and a starting point. He spent the rest of the evening searching online for Elena Vasquez, but found several people with that name in the city. Without more information, he couldn't tell which one was his Elena. That night, David lay in bed wide awake, hoping and dreading that she would appear again. He had moved the camera to get a better angle, and he had prepared a list of questions to ask her. But as the hours passed, his bed remained empty. The next night was the same. And the night after that. By Tuesday, David was starting to wonder if Elena would ever return. Maybe whatever connection they had shared was broken. Maybe she had found another way to escape. Or maybe he didn't want to think about the other possibilities. Then, at 2:18 a.m. on Wednesday night, she appeared again. This time, David was ready. He didn't move suddenly or grab his phone. Instead, he lay very still and watched her. Elena looked worse than before. The marks on her wrists were darker, and there appeared to be a bruise on her left shoulder. Her breathing was more labored, and she seemed to be having some kind of bad dream. "No, please," she whispered in her sleep. "I won't try to run again." David's chest tightened. Someone was hurting her, and she was trying to escape. But instead of getting away, she was somehow ending up in his bed. He decided to try something different very softly, so as not to startle her. David began to speak. "Elena, you're safe right now. You're not there anymore. You're somewhere safe." To his amazement, her breathing seemed to calm slightly. She was still asleep. But she had heard him. "Elena, can you hear me? My name is David. I want to help you." Her lips moved, and he heard the faintest whisper. "David?" "Yes, Elena. I'm here. You're safe right now. Can you tell me where you are when you're not here?" Elena's face scrunched up as if she was trying to remember something from a dream. Dark place. Cold. Can't see much. David's heart was pounding, but he kept his voice calm and gentle. "What do you remember about this place? Are you in a building? Basement, I think. Stone walls. Water drips somewhere? Always dripping. Are you alone there?" Elena's peaceful expression turned fearful. "He comes and goes. Gets angry when I try to leave. Says I belong to him now." David felt sick, but he forced himself to keep asking questions. "Elena, do you know how you're getting here?" "To my bed. Don't know. When I'm really scared, or when it hurts too much, I just go somewhere else. Started happening a few weeks ago. Always end up in the same place, warm and safe." "That's here, Elena. You're coming to my apartment, to my bed. I don't know how, but you are." Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she whispered, "Are you real?" "Yes, I'm real, and I'm going to help you get out of there." "Can't get out. Tried. So many times. Doors locked. Windows are too small. He's too strong." David thought about the coffee shop worker's words. "Elena, you used to work at the coffee shop on Pine Street, didn't you? The one with the red awning." "Yes. How did you know that? I go there sometimes. I think I remember seeing you there. You always seemed so happy." Elena's face grew sad. "That was before he took me. I was walking home from my night class, just walking home." Her voice grew quieter. "I was going to graduate next month. Had my whole life planned out. Elena, listen to me. You can still have that life. But I need you to help me find you. Can you tell me anything about where you are? Any sounds you hear, anything you can see?" Elena concentrated hard, her face tight with effort. "Church bells, every hour, church bells, and the bread. Smells like fresh bread sometimes. Makes me so hungry." "That's good, Elena. That's really good. What else?" "There's a little window, very small, near the ceiling. Sometimes I can see a street sign if I stand on the chair. Says Maple something. Can't see the rest." David quickly grabbed his notebook and wrote down everything she was telling him. Church bells, bread smells, Maple Street. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Elena, what does this person look like? The one who took you?" Elena's whole body tensed up. "Don't want to talk about him. Don't want to think about him." "It's okay, Elena. You don't have to. Just rest now. You're safe here." They talked for another 10 minutes. Elena told him about her classes, her dreams of becoming a teacher, her small apartment that she missed terribly. David told her about his work, his quiet life, and his promise to find her. "I don't understand how this is happening," Elena whispered, "but I'm glad it's happening. I was starting to think I would die there, and no one would ever know what happened to me. That's not going to happen, Elena. I know about you now. I'm going to find you. But how? Even if you find where I am, he'll just move me again. He's done it before. We'll figure it out together. Can you try to remember anything else about the building? The neighborhood?" Elena was quiet for a moment. "There's a butterfly stain on the wall. From water damage. Looks exactly like a butterfly, with its wings spread." As Elena gave him more details, David noticed something troubling. She was starting to fade. Not physically, but her voice was getting weaker. and she seemed to be having trouble focusing. "Elena, you're starting to disappear. How long do you usually stay here?" "Not long. Maybe 20 minutes when I go back." He always knows I was gone somehow. Gets really angry. David felt a chill run down his spine. "What happens when you go back?" "Better not to talk about it. Just..." He makes sure I don't try to leave again. "Elena, we're running out of time. Is there anything else you can tell me? Anything that might help me find you?" Elena's image was definitely fading now. The church bells, they play a song at noon. "Amazing Grace always makes me cry." "Elena, I'm going to find you. I promise. I hope so. David, I really hope so. If you don't find me soon, I don't think I'll be able to keep doing this much longer." Getting weaker each time, and then she was gone. David sat in his bed, staring at the empty space where she had been. He had more information now, but he also had a terrible sense of urgency. Elena was getting weaker, and whoever was holding her was getting more violent. David knew he was running out of time to save her, but for the first time since this all began, he felt like he might actually be able to do it. David couldn't waste any time. The next morning, he took another sick day from work and drove straight to Maple Street. It was only 15 minutes from his apartment, which made sense if Elena had been taken while walking home from her night classes. Maple Street stretched for almost 2 miles through an older part of the city. David drove slowly, looking for anything that matched Elena's description: church bells, the smell of fresh bread, and a building with a basement that had a small window facing the street. The first thing he found was St. Anthony's Church, right in the middle of Maple Street. David parked his car and listened. At exactly 11 a.m., the bells chimed 11 times. This had to be the church Elena was hearing every hour. Walking around the area, David noticed a small bakery just 2 blocks away from the church. The warm smell of fresh bread and pastries filled the air. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Now he needed to find buildings with basements. David walked up and down the street, looking at every structure. Most of the buildings were old houses or small businesses, but there were several that looked like they might have basements. A few old warehouses, some apartment buildings from the 1940s, and a couple of commercial buildings that seemed mostly empty. David spent the entire day checking each building he could access. He talked to shop owners, asking casual questions about empty spaces or buildings that might be for rent. Most people were helpful, but he didn't find anything that felt right. As the sun started to set, David felt discouraged. He had found the church and the bakery, but there were still dozens of buildings that could be Elena's prison, and he couldn't exactly go around breaking into places to check their basements. That night, David waited anxiously for Elena to appear. When she materialized at 2:35 a.m., he could see immediately that she was in worse condition. There was a new bruise on her cheek, and she seemed weaker than before. "Elena, it's David. I found Maple Street. I found the church and the bakery." Elena's eyes, though still closed, seemed to focus on his voice. "You found it?" "Yes. But there are a lot of buildings. I need more details." "Can you see anything else from that little window?" Elena concentrated hard. Sometimes I see people walking. There's a bus stop. Yellow bus stop sign." David grabbed his notebook. "Which side of the street is the bus stop on? Can you tell?" "When I look out the window, it's to my right, and there's a building across the street, red brick, has a sign, but I can't read all of it. Something about auto repair." David's heart raced. These were specific details he could use. "Elena, how many floors is the building you're in?" "Just 2, I think. The basement where I am, and 1 floor above. Sometimes I hear footsteps above me." "What about the entrance? When he brings you food or when he comes down? Where does he come from?" Elena's face tightened with fear. "Stairs. Wooden stairs that creak. The 3rd step from the bottom always makes a loud noise." They talked for 15 more minutes, with Eleanor providing every detail she could remember. She described the layout of her prison: a basement room about 10 feet by 12 feet, with stone walls and a concrete floor. There was an old furnace in one corner that didn't work, and pipes running along the ceiling that sometimes dripped water. But as their conversation continued, David noticed something alarming. Elena was fading faster than before. Her voice was getting weaker, and she seemed to be struggling to stay connected. Elena, you're disappearing quicker tonight. Are you okay? Getting harder to stay here? Feels so tired all the time now. And he's getting suspicious. Thinks I'm planning something because I seem different when I wake up. David felt a chill of fear. What do you mean, different? I remember pieces of our conversations sometimes. Like dreams, he notices that I seem more hopeful, less scared. Yesterday he asked me why I was smiling in my sleep. Elena, you have to be careful. Don't let him know anything is different. Trying not to. But David, I don't think I can keep doing this much longer. Each time I come here, it takes more out of me. And he's talking about moving me again soon. Moving you? When? Don't know exactly. But he's been going out more during the day. Says he's looking for a new place. Somewhere farther away where nobody will find me. David felt panic rising in his chest. If Elena's captor moved her away from Maple Street, David might never find her. All the clues he had gathered would become useless. Elena, I'm going to find you tomorrow. I promise. I have enough information now. What if you can't? What if he moves me first? Then I'll find you. Wherever he takes you. I won't give up on you, Elena. I promise. Elena's image was almost completely faded now. David, if something happens to me, if you never see me again, will you tell my family? My mom lives in Arizona. Her name is Carmen Vasquez. Tell her I loved her and I never stopped trying to. Come home, Elena. Don't talk like that. I'm going to find you alive. And you're going to tell her yourself. I hope so, David. I really hope so. And then she was gone. David sat in his bed, his hands shaking. Elena was running out of time, and so was he. Tomorrow he would have to search every building that matched her description, and somehow he would have to do it without getting caught or alerting her captor. The next morning, David drove back to Maple Street with a new plan. He had printed out a map of the area and marked every building. That could potentially be Elena's prison. He also brought a pair of binoculars and a small flashlight. David found the yellow bus stop sign Elena had mentioned. It was on the right side of Maple Street, just as she had described. Across from it was a red brick building with a faded sign that read Tony's Auto Repair, closed. Looking around from the bus stop, David could see 3 buildings that might have basements with windows facing the street. One was a small apartment building, another was an old warehouse, and the third was a narrow building that looked like it used to be a small factory. David decided to start with the warehouse. It was the most isolated of the 3, with no nearby neighbors who might notice suspicious activity. The building looked abandoned, with boarded-up windows on the main floor and weeds growing around the foundation. Walking around to the back of the building, David found what he was looking for. There was a small basement window, just big enough for someone to see out if they stood on something. From this angle, Elena would be able to see the bus stop to her right and the auto repair shop across the street. David's heart was pounding as he realized he might have found Elena's prison. But how could he be sure? And how could he get her out without putting her in more danger? As he stood there trying to figure out his next move, David heard something that made his blood run cold. Footsteps. Someone was walking around inside the building. David quickly moved away from the window and hid behind a dumpster. A few minutes later, a man came out of a side door to the warehouse. He was tall, thin, and wore a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He looked around nervously, then got into an old pickup truck and drove away. David waited until the truck was completely out of sight, then approached the building again. This had to be it. This had to be where Elena was being held. But now David faced the hardest decision of his life. Should he call the police and risk them not believing his story? Should he try to rescue Elena himself and risk making things worse? Or should he wait for Elena to appear in his bed again and try to get more information? As David stood there looking at the warehouse, he realized that Elena's life was in his hands. Whatever he decided to do next would determine whether she lived or died, and he was running out of time to make that decision. David knew he couldn't wait any longer. Elena was getting weaker with each visit, and her captor was planning to move her soon. If David was going to save her, it had to be today. He drove home and spent an hour thinking through his options, calling. The police seemed like the smartest choice. But how could he explain how he knew where to find Elena? If he told them the truth about the teleportation, they would think he was crazy. If he made up a story, they might not take it seriously enough to act quickly. Finally, David decided on a plan that felt like the best compromise. He would call the police and tell them he had received an anonymous tip about a missing person being held in the warehouse. It wasn't exactly true, but it wasn't completely false either. David called the police station and asked to speak to someone about a missing person case. When a detective came on the line, David took a deep breath and began his story. "I think I know where Elena Vasquez is being held," he said. "The woman who disappeared about 6 months ago. How do you know about this case?" The detective asked. David had prepared for this question. "I saw her picture online when I was reading about missing persons. Someone contacted me, anonymously, and said they thought they saw her in a warehouse on Maple Street. Why didn't this person call us directly? They said they were scared, afraid of getting involved. But they gave me enough details that I think it might be real." The detective asked for more information, and David shared everything he could without mentioning the supernatural aspects. He described the warehouse, the basement window, and even the man he had seen leaving the building. "We'll check it out," the detective said. "But if this turns out to be a false lead, we're going to want to know more about your anonymous source." "I understand," David said. "I just want Elena to be found safe." After hanging up, David drove back to Maple Street. He parked several blocks away and walked to a position where he could see the warehouse. He wanted to be there when the police arrived, just in case something went wrong. 20 minutes later, 3 police cars pulled up to the warehouse. David watched as officers surrounded the building and then entered through what looked like a side door. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. For several minutes, nothing happened. David began to worry that he had been wrong about the location. What if Elena was in one of the other buildings? What if her captor had already moved her? Then David saw 2 officers emerge from the building, supporting someone between them. Even from a distance, he could see it was a woman with dark hair, Elena. David felt tears of relief running down his face. She was alive. She was walking. The officers were being gentle with her, wrapping her in a blanket and helping her into an ambulance that had just arrived. A few minutes later, David saw another person being brought out of the building. This time it was a man in handcuffs, surrounded by 4 officers. David couldn't see his face clearly, but he could see the man struggling against the officers, shouting something David couldn't hear. David stayed hidden until all the police cars and the ambulance had left. Only then did he allow himself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. Elena was free. After months of being held captive, she was finally safe. But David realized his part in this story was far from over. Elena was going to need medical care, probably counseling, and definitely time to recover from her ordeal. And David had no idea if she would remember the nighttime conversations or understand the role he had played in her rescue. The next day, David saw Elena a story on the news. The reporter said she had been found in an abandoned warehouse and that her captor had been arrested. They didn't mention how the police had found her, which David was grateful for. Elena was described as being in stable condition at the hospital, and the reporter said she was expected to make a full recovery. David wanted to visit Elena in the hospital, but he wasn't sure if that was appropriate. They had never actually met in the normal sense. Their entire relationship had existed in that strange space between sleeping and waking, reality and dreams. 3 days later, David made his decision. He bought a small bouquet of flowers and went to the hospital. At the information desk, he asked if Elena Vasquez was allowed to have visitors. "Are you family?" the receptionist asked. "No, I'm the person who called the police. I wanted to make sure she was okay." The receptionist made a phone call, then told David that Elena had agreed to see him. She gave him a room number on the 4th floor. David's hands were shaking as he knocked on Elena's hospital room door. When he heard her voice say, "Come in," he took a deep breath and entered. Elena was sitting up in bed, looking much healthier than she had during their supernatural encounters. Her wrists were bandaged, and she had a few visible bruises, but her eyes were bright and alert. When she saw David, she tilted her head with a puzzled expression. "You're the one who called the police?" she asked. David nodded. "My name is David. I was the one who gave them the tip about where to find you." Elena studied his face carefully. "You look familiar. Have we met before?" David wasn't sure how to answer that question. "I used to go to the coffee shop where you worked, on Pine Street. I remember seeing you there." "Oh, right." Elena's face lit up with recognition. "You always ordered a large coffee, black, no sugar. You were always very polite." David smiled. "That's me. When I saw your picture among the missing persons reports, I remembered you from the coffee shop. It made me want to help find you." "But how did you know where I was?" "The police said someone gave you information, but they wouldn't tell me who." David had prepared for this question too. "Someone called me after seeing your picture online. They thought they had seen you near that warehouse. They were too scared to call the police directly, so they asked me to do it." Elena nodded slowly. "Whoever that person was, they saved my life. I don't think I could have survived much longer in that place." They talked for about an hour. Elena told David about her recovery, how the doctors said she was healing well, and how her mother was flying in from Arizona to take care of her. She also mentioned having strange, vivid dreams during her captivity, dreams about being in a safe, warm place where someone named David was trying to help her. "The weird thing is," Elena said, "those dreams felt more real than anything else. That happened to me during those months, like I was actually somewhere else, talking to someone who cared about what happened to me." David felt a chill run down his spine. Elena did remember, at least partially. "Dreams can feel very real when we're going through difficult times," he said carefully. "Maybe." Elena said, "But these felt different. And the strangest part is that the person in my dreams had the same name as you, and looked a lot like you too." David wasn't sure what to say to that. Before he could respond, Elena reached into the drawer next to her bed and pulled out something that made David's heart stop. It was the silver ring, the one she had left behind during one of her visits to his bed. "The police found this with my things," Elena said, holding up the ring. "But I don't remember having it before I was taken. And it doesn't belong to the man who held me captive. It's like it just appeared out of nowhere." David stared at the ring, remembering how he had held it during those long nights, using it as proof that Elena's visits were real. "Maybe it was your guardian angel," David said quietly. Elena looked at the ring, then at David. "Maybe it was," she said, "or maybe it was something even more wonderful than that." 6 months later, David ran into Elena at the same coffee shop where she used to work. She was a customer now, studying for her teaching degree with textbooks spread across a small table. When she saw David, she waved him over. "How are you doing?" David asked, genuinely happy to see her looking healthy and strong. "Much better," Elena said. "I'm almost caught up with my classes, and I should graduate next semester. And I've been going to counseling, which has really helped me process everything that happened." "That's wonderful, Elena. I'm so glad you're doing well." Elena smiled at him. "David, I never properly thanked you for what you did. The police told me that if you hadn't called when you did, they might not have found me in time." "I'm just glad you're safe," David said. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out the silver ring. "I wanted to give this back to you," she said. David looked at her in surprise. "That's not mine." "Elena, I think it is," she said gently. "I can't prove it, and I can't explain how I know. But I'm certain this ring belongs to you, or at least, it belongs to the person who saved my life." Elena placed the ring on the table between them. "I don't know how you really found me, David, and I don't need to know. But I want you to have this as a reminder that sometimes impossible things happen. And sometimes those impossible things save lives." David picked up the ring and put it in his pocket. "Thank you, Elena. Thank you, David, for everything." As David walked home that day, he thought about how much his life had changed since that first night when Elena appeared in his bed. He had learned that the world was full of mysteries he would never understand. But he had also learned that sometimes those mysteries led to the most important moments of his life. David never experienced anything supernatural again, but he didn't need to. He had helped save Elena's life, and that was more than enough magic for one lifetime. The ring remained in his